.533 was not a good year for Gelimer and the Vandal kingdom. In early spring, an Eastern Roman-backed rebellion sprung up in Tripolitania. Soon after, the Vandal governor in Sardinia, Gotus, attempted to declare the Mediterranean island an independent state. Gotus had even opened up dialogue with Justinian in Constantinople, hoping that his coup would have Roman support. Gelimer sent 5,000 troops under the command of his brother, Zazo, to the island in order to squash Gotus's attempted revolt. But, unbeknownst to him, an Eastern Roman army under Belisarius was already on its way to Africa. After landing in September, Belisarius' army was able to easily move up the African coast. They engaged Gelimer's army at the Battle of Ad Decimum on September 13th, 533, and won a clear victory. The Romans took Carthage, the Vandal capital, while Gelimer fled westward. Belisarius entered Carthage on September 15th. He immediately took to strengthening the city's walls and prepared for a possible siege should Gelimer try to retake his former capital. He also sent messengers back to Constantinople to inform Justinian of his successes. Meanwhile, Zazo had won a clear victory in Sardinia, and Gotus had been killed. Zazo sent word of his victory back to Carthage, but the messengers didn't know that Carthage had fallen to the Romans until they entered the city and were captured. Around this time, Vandal delegates arrived in Visigothic Spain to request an alliance with King Theudas. These delegates had been sent before Belisarius even landed on the African coast, but apparently took their sweet time making the voyage. By the time they landed in Spain, Theudas had already received word that Carthage had fallen to the Romans. I don't know what took them so long to make the trip, but I like to imagine that they were just living it up as they cruised the Mediterranean. A real Vandal party boat. Knowing that the Vandals were on the ropes, Theudas had no interest in pursuing an alliance and sent the delegates back to Africa. But he didn't tell them specifically what had happened back home, and all they gathered was that something had gone wrong. They decided to return to Carthage, which was now under Roman control. They, too, were promptly captured when they arrived in the city. As things stood, Belisarius had the Vandal capital. He had his enemy on the run, and he had information from around the Mediterranean from messengers meant for Gelimer. He was clearly in the driver's seat. Gelimer, meanwhile, was taking refuge in Bulla Regia. He hadn't heard from his envoys to Spain or from his brother. He was hoping that the Moors in the west would be willing to ally with him, but many of the Moors had already sent diplomats to Belisarius. They could see the writing on the wall as well. Gelimer was isolated, but he still had fight in him, and just as importantly, he still had cash to throw around. He began bribing the locals, buying their allegiance, and he offered a bounty on the heads of Roman soldiers. Gelimer apparently received so many Roman heads from local Vandals that he began to believe that Belisarius' army must be taking significant losses. However, most Roman soldiers remained safely within Carthage's walls. Gelimer was getting the heads of Roman servants and merchants, not soldiers. Belisarius' army was not taking the losses that Gelimer thought it was. Gelimer was, however, rebuilding his own army. He sent his own messengers to Sardinia, recalling Zazo and updating him on the situation. He also welcomed additional men from what allied Moors he could find, although most Moors did not join his cause, and the numbers that did show up were less than impressive. Gelimer wanted a quick, decisive victory over Belisarius. So when Zazo's men arrived, Gelimer wasted little time before leading his newly reinforced army back towards his former capital. As they approached, the Vandals tore down a portion of Carthage's aqueduct and encamped about 15 to 20 miles outside the city, near a place called Tricamarum. Gelimer hoped that the citizens of Carthage would soon turn on Belisarius. He also began sending messages to the Roman allied Hunnic cavalry that had served Belisarius so well at the Battle of Ad Decimum. The Huns weren't particularly happy with the Eastern Romans. They hadn't expected to be sent to North Africa to begin with, and they now feared that they would be the ones left to defend the territory if the Romans were victorious. They were on the verge of defecting to Gelimer's side when Belisarius, aware of their anger, held a banquet for them and promised that they would be allowed to return home with plenty of riches once the war was won. This might not have secured the full loyalty of the Huns, but it at least kept them from joining Gelimer. The Huns seemed to be in a wait-and-see pattern, prepared to support whichever side appeared likely to win. Belisarius decided to make his move before any further defections could become an issue. He sent out the cavalry and the Bucalarii under the command of John the Armenian. John had led the Bucalarii at the Battle of Ad Decimum when they caught Amatus off guard and crushed his forces. He now led the cavalry and Bucalarii to Tricamarum and set up his own camp. Belisarius would follow later with the Roman infantry. Unlike at the Battle of Ad Decimum, Gelimer had some idea of what the Roman army was doing and what their numbers were. On December 15th, Gelimer deployed his men behind a small stream. Zazo would command the center with his men from the Sardinian campaign. John was not expecting Gelimer to offer battle, but hastily deployed his men on the other side of the stream and took command of the center. Belisarius had not yet arrived with the infantry. The stream would be an important factor in the battle. Either side would have difficulty crossing and would probably lose cohesion in the process, making them easy targets for the enemy. John tried to lure the Vandals into crossing by sending out mounted archers to harass the Vandal center. The small group could inflict casualties from a distance, and John hoped they would be able to lure the enemy across the stream. But Zazo recognized the tactic and held his men in place. John tried his luck a second time. This time he personally led the charge, but the Vandals once again held their position, refusing to chase the Romans across the stream. But John noticed something on these two attacks. The Vandal wings were holding in place as well. They were not chomping at the bit to aid their center. This gave John an idea. He would lead a third charge, a full assault on the Vandal center. But this time, he wasn't trying to lure them back across the stream. He was trying to break them. The fighting was fierce, and the center started to give. Zazo was killed, but the Vandal wings were still not aiding the center. The Romans recognized this and took full advantage. They charged across the stream as the Vandal center was crumbling. Zazo was already dead, and Gelimer, well, we're not 100% sure what Gelimer was doing, but whatever it wasn't working. The Vandal flanks broke in fear and retreated to their camp. The Roman infantry arrived later that afternoon. The Eastern Romans prepared for an all-out assault on the Vandal camp. But before it could happen, Gelimer fled, along with some family and servants. When the Vandal army realized that their king had fled, they scattered. When the Eastern Romans arrived, the camp was mostly unmanned, but much of the Vandal treasure remained. The soldiers had previously followed Belisarius' orders not to plunder or to loot. But now, sensing the war was at an end, the Eastern Romans spent much of that night raiding the camp and the surrounding area. Belisarius feared that the Vandal army could still regroup and launch a counterattack, but luckily for him, it was not to be. The next morning, he was finally able to get his army under control. He then prepared for the next step in the campaign. Belisarius had taken the Vandal capital. His army had stopped the reinforced Vandal army's attempted counterattack. But Gelimer was still out there.